Really quick, if you haven't seen my most recent episode on Minthara, make sure you check it out because this is a spicy commander with an unexpected return of a mechanic. But don't leave just yet because this episode is on a card that is absolutely crazy, definitely something I never expected to see, and well, here we go. First up, a big thank you to MTG Goldfish for the translated version of this card. Descent into Avernus, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, is an enchantment that costs 2 in a red. It has, at the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 descent counters on Descent into Avernus. Then, each player creates X treasure tokens, and Descent into Avernus deals X damage to them, where X is the number of descent counters on Descent into Avernus. My goodness, is this a crazy card that is going to make things kind of chaotic at the table for a bit. And for a bit, I mean, I guess, for the rest of the game, as long as this stays in play. First up, this is going to give players access to a ton of temporary ramp with a lot of treasures just being handed to them. At the beginning of your upkeep, the first time, everyone gets 2 treasures. Then the next time, 4, then 6. And yeah, if you get this down on turn 3, I mean, this can just speed up the game incredibly quickly. Now, of course, on top of that, I mean, it's going to speed up the game further because everyone is also getting pinged for damage based off the number of treasures that they're getting. I mean, with that same example, even with this just staying in play for 3 turns, getting that trigger 3 times, that is 2 plus 4 plus 6, that is 12 treasures per person. So, 48 treasures in total dished out, and also 48 damage too. Now, obviously, this card is pretty crazy, and yeah, it's definitely not for every kind of a deck out there because, well, most decks out there really don't want to give their opponents a ton of treasures. Even though you are getting the same amount, technically you are giving out more than you are getting because, there's more, opponents in a game of Commander. So you obviously are either going to want a commander that takes advantage of this or ways to unbalance the scales. So either you're going to be taking less damage than your opponents, you're going to be getting more treasures than your opponents, or you're getting benefits for your opponents getting those treasures or using them, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, there are definitely some commanders that can make a lot of use out of this card. And yeah, again, with those commanders, things can end pretty quickly when this is in play and this stays in play for just a couple of turns. So with that said, let's talk about some commanders that might want to utilize this card and talk about some cards that can work incredibly well with it. And the first one that came to my mind was Torbran, Thane of Red Fell. Torbran is a 2/4 Dwarf Noble that says if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So this is a commander that can unbalance the scales for you. Again, every single player is gonna, that first time make 2 treasures and take 2 damage, but now instead of that, you are still just taking 2 damage and your opponents take 4. So that's essentially an additional 6 damage that you're dishing out, between your opponents every single time this happens, and yeah, that can really add up. So yeah, Torbran decks out there definitely might want to consider this card, which again is a nice repeatable source of an immense amount of damage. And of course, yes, it does, give everyone access to temporary ramp, but you like things going fast anyways, right? Next up, a commander that is absolutely going to love this card, and I mean, I hate to say auto-include in a deck, but this seems like a slam dunk for Vazi, Keen Negotiator. Vazi is a 3/3 human advisor with haste that has tap, target opponent creates X treasure tokens, where X is the number of treasure tokens you created this turn. On top of that, whenever an opponent casts a spell or activates an ability, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it or activate it, put a +1 counter on target creature, then draw a card. So Vazi is already about dishing out a lot of treasures, and again, you could essentially just dish out even more because you are getting treasures as well on your upkeep. You're taking damage too, but you are getting treasures, and actually, there's plenty of ways to gain life in this kind of a deck. I mean, Fangren Mauler, is that what it's called? Gains 5 life anytime any artifact hits the graveyard, so yeah, I mean, you can gain a ton of life with this. And sorry, just looked it up, Fangren Marauder, that is the name, Marauder. Regardless, you might be giving your opponents treasures, but when they utilize those treasures, again, for casting spells or activating abilities, you get counters on creatures and you get to draw cards. Now, there is a limit on a caster activation, but still, you can get a lot of value out of this card being in play for a couple of turns with your commander. Next up, how about Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight? This can be just absolutely deadly in no time with this commander. Gisela is a 5/5 angel with flying and first strike that says, if a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, that source deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. On top of that, if a source would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent half that damage rounded up. So even just on that first upkeep trigger, that is going to be 4 damage to all of your opponents because it is doubled, and 1 to you. That is it. Instead of it just being 2 and 2 like it would be normally, it's 4 to 1. Next time, it is going to be 8 damage to all of your opponents and only 2 damage to you. So this tips the scales in an incredible way, and yeah, you can finish off your opponents very quickly with this combination. Now, moving outside of commanders, let's talk about some types of cards that can work very well in combination with this new enchantment. Well, Blessed Sanctuary is one of the first ones that came to my mind, and it's a fantastic card in this scenario. It's an enchantment for 3 white, and it says prevent all non-combat damage to be dealt to you and creatures you control. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white unicorn creature token. So a lot of decks that include this card actually really care about that second part, and the first part's just a nice additional thing. But obviously, in combination with this new enchantment, well, yeah, you're not taking any damage from it because that is non-combat damage. So your opponents might be paying in, damage for their treasures, but you are not. You're just getting free treasures. And of course, there are other ways, that prevent damage from a single source or some spells like that, so make sure you're keeping those in mind. And of course, you can tip the scales in other ways. I mean, let's talk about Zorn. Zorn says if you create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. So yes, you are dishing out treasures to your opponents, but you're always going to be getting slightly more than they do. And of course, you can also benefit from those treasures being created in other ways, like Academy Manufacturer, which says if you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create 1 of each. So now with every single treasure that you're getting, on top of that, you're also getting a clue and a food token, and this can add up very, very quickly. I mean, basically, instead of just getting 1 token, you are getting 3, so that's additional card draw and life gain if you need it. And yeah, you might need that life gain from the food with all that damage that you're going to be dishing out. But of course, one that is absurd and one that is absurdly expensive is Doubling Season. It says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead, but it's not done yet. Because also, if an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead. So not only do you get twice as many treasures, but you're also getting twice as many of those descent counters on your enchantment to speed things up even faster. Yeah, there's a reason Doubling Season works in so many decks and is so incredibly expensive. Moving on though, another way to really take advantage of these treasures is with Disciple of the Vault. It says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. So this can be a fantastic way to punish opponents for utilizing treasures, or even if an opponent utilizes their treasures, you can still drain someone else out. Maybe you can even make a deal and be like, hey, if you use all your treasures right now, I'll just drain that person out and they lose. A less targeted approach, though, comes with Magnetic Mind, which can be incredible. It says whenever another artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Magnetic Mind deals 2 damage to that artifact's controller. Now, keep in mind, this does impact you as well, but obviously if you've got something like Blessed Sanctuary in play or some other way to prevent this damage, great. If not, maybe don't utilize all your treasures so quickly. Regardless, yeah, on top of the damage that, your enchantment's already putting out, this can just be pretty absurd. And speaking of absurd, well, because of Vazi, last spoiler season, Viridian Revel's price went up quite a bit, and it's probably going to go up even more now with this set. It says whenever an artifact is put in an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. So in combination with this new enchantment, my goodness, the amount of card draw that you can have. Just consider even just that first turn. Your opponents are getting 6 treasures. That's 6 cards drawn. And yes, there has been some confusion in the comments before and questions about this, so yes, I just want to clarify. Tokens do hit the graveyard technically, okay? And one way to really make them hit the graveyard, well, all at once, is with Vandal Blast. Vandal Blast says destroy target artifact you don't control, and you can also overload it, so it destroys all artifacts you don't control, which, yeah, that's what you're going to be doing. So this can force your opponent's hands to utilize all their treasures when they don't want to. If they're just, holding their treasures and keeping them back, you're like, nope, now you got to utilize them right now. I get to keep mine, but you don't get to keep yours. And again, of course, in combination with things like, Viridian Revel, you can draw an absurd amount of cards. Magnetic Mind, you can dish out an absurd amount of damage, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, board wipes like this are just great ways to force your opponent's hands into doing what you want them to do. But of course, you can also speed things up with this enchantment with things like Paradox Haze and Psionic Resonator. Paradox Haze says, enchant player at the beginning of enchant player's first upkeep each turn, that player gets an additional upkeep step after this step. Basically, enchant yourself with this, get 2 upkeeps, cool, and that's going to trigger twice, and yeah, that can really speed things up. And then Psionic Resonator has pay 2, tap, copy target, triggered ability you control, you may choose targets for the copy, so yeah, for 2 mana, that's going to be well worth it, and again, in combination with each of these, this game's not going to last very long at all. And of course, keep in mind with those descent counters, yeah, you can proliferate them, and there are plenty of great ways to do that, maybe with something like Throne of Geth or Flux Channeler or Thrumming Bird. Throne of Geth has tap, sacrifice an artifact, proliferate, so maybe just sacrifice one of those treasures that you just got to get another descent counter on, your descent. Have fun. Or how about an even more abusable effect like Flux Channeler, which says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. So yeah, this can get pretty out of hand. And of course, just a nice repeatable effect like Thrumming Bird where you say, hey, I've got a 1/1 flyer, deals combination of player proliferate. You can get that through essentially on one opponent each turn generally. So make sure you're keeping proliferate in mind when you're thinking about this card as well. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is definitely not a card I expected to see. This thing is really crazy and off the wall. Descent into Avernus. I mean, it's definitely going to lead to some very, very quick games and some very, very interesting games, I am sure. Again, it's definitely not for every commander deck out there. I mean, it's for very specific commander decks that can utilize it and can definitely tilt the scales into their favor. I mean, again, Gisela, my goodness, that is gross. Regardless, make sure you're staying tuned to this channel for even more exciting spoilers and exciting quick takes that I'm sure are coming very soon. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.